But we're kicking off our series, our next newest installation now of our podcast series under the umbrella of Community Conversations. And this one is all things return to office. And it made sense to us because it's back to school time of year, middle, late August. Up in Midwest, we start a little after Labor Day, but I was in Georgia last week and they already started back to school. And one of the biggest questions that society has been facing in the last year or so is around this idea of what it means to return back to the office. And I just want to highlight here, I'm going to pull up my slide deck here, and I want to show just a few take you on a quick history lesson of the last 5 years of these workplace changes in motion. All right, March of 2020, all of a sudden we hit this incredible shift in society, and the big conversation was we got to be safe, we have to work remotely. And if you think about it, there were many organizations. Here's Coinbase, that was one of the first to begin to announce that this is working and they're going to remain remote work forever. Pinterest followed, and it wasn't just the tech companies. Some of the big consulting firms realized that, wow, this is such an effective way to get things done. We can remain hybrid forever. And so it began to change people's expectation about what work looked like. Now, in this recent years, there's been a new shift. We went from remote to a big return emphasis. And there were many headlines about large organizations saying, whoa, 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 this isn't the best way to get things done. Amazon came out and said, you know what, everyone needs to be back in the office 5 days out of the week. This is an example. Forbes mentioned that Dell, a technology company, did the same thing, and JP Morgan. And there were many, countless other groups that were asking the same thing. So that brings us to today's conversation. And what we want to do is share some ideas on how do we manage expectations? How do we address some of these different positions and opinions about the best way to get work done. In advance of all of our conversations, we invite our participants to share some of their top questions with us. And it always gives us an insight as to who is interested in these type of conversations. And there were 60 different titles represented. And that's fascinating to me. Everything from CEO to salespeople were wanting to know, how do we manage these changes? There were 50 different industries represented in this conversation. Everything from technology, healthcare, banking, the legal industry is wrestling with these questions. And this was what I found most fascinating. There were 35 variations of work settings. We asked you to tell us, what is your environment like? And this was the part that I found most curious, because it used to be kind of a binary world. We were either white collar or blue collar employees, right? One or the other. You're either salaried or you're hourly. And now there's so much variety depending on the industry you're in, the type of work you're being asked to do, and the options in which you can get that work done. Tandem with that, we saw a lot of different questions or statements about it. Some people said employees love flexibility. Other people said people are taking advantage of the flexibility that our companies are offering. Some people said hybrid creates greater productivity. Other people said there's a lack of respect for punctuality in this new environment. And this was probably my favorite comment of all the things that came in. Someone said some people are so grumpy when they have to come to work, they won't even make eye contact. And I read that and I thought, okay, there's a need for this conversation. So here's what we plan to cover in the time that we have today. We're going to talk about what are the different generational expectations, given what we do here at BridgeWorks. This is key and paramount and foundational to everything we do. And people asked about this. How do you preserve culture and connection in a hybrid workplace, which seems to be pretty consistent with what a lot of organizations are offering? And then how can leaders balance flexibility, productivity, and equity? In other words, how do you make it fair for everyone within your company? And we're going to provide time for Q&A. So do me a favor. I see we've got a growing number of participants that are joining the call now. And thankfully, I turned my microphone on so you could hear me. And if you can hear me, we have the chat feature that is open. I'd love for you to say hello in the chat, because throughout this conversation, we're going to be keeping an eye on that chat feature. Just lets us know if you've got thoughts or things that show up in your mind or that are important to you. We want to make you center to this conversation. The other thing is we've got a Q&A function in Zoom at the end of the conversation. We're going to allow time for you to just ask whatever questions that are top of mind to you that we might not have had a chance to cover in the conversation. Awesome. I'm seeing lots of hellos, people that are friends. I see someone from Portland, Maine checking in there. That's awesome. So please continue to use that. And now I get to introduce the guest of honor. This is Mr. Dan O'Brien will be my guest host today. I met Dan. He works with an organization called RSM, incredible group of folks that are serving companies worldwide. And met Dan when he invited us to participate and work with them on a generational project. And immediately I just knew there was something special about this guy. So before I let Dan weigh in just a few highlights, by title, you're a senior director with RSM, responsible for the culture of inclusion leader. If I'm getting this right, you can correct some of the mistakes. You started off with the organization early on in your career, responsible for recruitment and retaining talent. You are a senior professional in human resources. You were awarded National Achievement for Community Service at RSM, all around good guy. You served as the CEO for the Action for Racial Equity Fellowship. And I remember you working on that project amidst all the other projects that you did. And here's the thing that I think is most important when I was reading through your bio. The number one thing you're responsible for is promoting a welcoming environment for everyone. And I know the first time that I met you, you provided that for me.
Oh, there
And
you
over
go.
the course of our time together, I got to meet lots of people at RSM that work for you. And I could start mentioning names, but I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But everyone who I talked to, when your name came up, there was just like, I mean, big heart emojis in their eyes. Everyone seems to love Dan O'Brien. So, Dan, hello,
Appreciate
welcome
that.
to the cast.
Yeah, yeah.
How are you doing, sir?
Oh, and I am feeling phenomenal. Phil, like I appreciate the tee up here, man. My heart feels good right now. I appreciate all that. And it's something that, I definitely, really I honestly I don't have to work on it too much, right? Like it's just like I love people. I'm a student of culture. And so I consider myself constantly in a learning mode when it comes to this type of stuff. So appreciate being here with you. I mean, as you said, I met you a while ago. I was an employee net resource group leader at
Yeah.
the time, focusing on generations in the workforce. But you turned me on to the fourth turning book, by the way, too. Maybe
Oh,
maybe we could, dialogue a little bit about that at some point, because I feel like some of that's really happening right now.
oh
But
man.
no, you and the BridgeWorks team had really offered us an incredible amount of coaching, mentoring, perspective, and really great sort of content on how to tackle the dynamic environment that happens when you put different generations in the same team and working together. So I still think back to some of the early on training efforts that we put together that really changed the game for us here at RSM. We're still using them actually,
Good. Good. The only
but yeah,
trouble there
and we
is,
always get such great accolades
oh,
from participants when they get into it, right? So thank you, BridgeWorks, and thank you, Phil, for having me here today.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm so honored and excited to get into this topic. And when we had our pre-call, we started going down so many rabbit holes. I said, this conversation is not going to be enough. We're going to have several others. And now you mentioned the fourth turning, and now I'm like, oh, brother, don't get me started.
That's yeah.
So
Absolutely.
stay focused for now on
Yes.
return to work. But you're teasing me, man. You're teasing me. So, yeah, and here's the reason, again, our friendship, the partnership, you are a student, you are a learner, and I saw that in you right away, and I'm learning from you. And the reason I felt you'd be such a great co-host on this is just a little window into our journey at BridgeWorks. We were fortunate. We were blessed in that we were about to switch offices right before the pandemic hit. And so we let our lease expire at our suburban office. We were going to move to downtown Minneapolis. And then all of a sudden this, conversation about this, sickness started talking. So we said, well, let's just hold off before signing a new lease. And thankfully, we weren't beholden to anyone financially. So we just went to remote work like everyone else did. I want to shout out to Haberman, an organization that let us come and seek shelter in their office from time to time when we had team meetings through the pandemic. But we got to a point where we realized, okay, if we're going to start being productive again, if we're going to, kind of move to that next level, it was time to come back to office. And so I imagine RSM, like many organizations, went through a similar journey. And so here we are today talking about how do we navigate this new normal. And I'm just curious, what just real high level, what was your experience and what went on? And the reason, again,
Oh,
you're a much
yeah.
larger organization than us, but what was it like managing all that?
Oh, it's such an important topic. And I mean, like you said, I feel like we similarly had, a moment where we again were very much focused on the caring and taking the utmost steps to make sure everybody was in a place of safety coming through that pandemic moment and really shifting into a virtual work environment, right? I mean, we are RSM, as you might not have heard of us, we are the fifth largest professional services firm in the country that serves primarily middle market companies worldwide. So we're a full service business that does audit, tax, consulting, work for middle market clients and companies. And our business is service. So not only were we sort of trying to figure out how to protect our people who are our business, but then, sort of the interaction dynamic between our clients and them trying to figure out how to navigate that moment of time with the pandemic. But as you said, Phil, like come and learning through that, obviously, what off our office footprint, how big it is, how small it is, how do we navigate that coming out of COVID has been really interesting, as well as this new value proposition and relationship with our people. Like some people joined us and only knew, this, virtual experience. Some of us, our boomers and our Xers and our millennials, knew, what it was like before COVID.
Right.
And so, the dynamic of that, is still sort of prevalent in sort of how we're operating right now. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but it's really fascinating.
Yeah. And
But
that
it,
makes
it
sense.
definitely shook us a little bit. And there was always flexibility in the system. And arguably before COVID, we really didn't capitalize on it as much. Like we learned a lot for sure.
And I think that's such a key point. We did learn through this because it was a massive experiment, and we could begin to play around with new tools and see what it all looked like. And I appreciate the tee up here as it relates to the generational component because I want to start moving through the questions that came through. And uh, just by way of generational background, I'm going to pull up a slide deck here for you, and it's going to show, when we talk about different generations, Dan just mentioned, baby boomers born between 46 and 64, and you can kind of see the different breakdown there. But I want to show you another piece here. This makes up the current generational breakdown in the workplace right now. So talk about massive change over the last 5 years. One of the significant changes is the fact that millennials are the largest generation in the workplace right now. And for the first time, Gen Z makes up more of the workforce than baby boomers, who have been the backbone. And so that's a massive shift that's taken place. And I want to highlight one of the questions that came in were what are the different generational expectations. What is each group looking for as it relates to return to work? And you can see here just kind of some of the things that people were feeling underneath that. There's different work ethic for younger generations. This person's frustrated in that there's this they use the word entitlement, which that's not my words, that's other people's words, but this expectation they should have more flexibility because they're taking care of kids. Another person said, why don't older generations understand that this can be something that works out really well? And so we see the tension happening between the generations, and that's why we want to highlight some of these points. I'm going to reference here a study that Gallup just did, fresh off the presses, came out last month, and it's looking at preferred work location by generation. And the three options are exclusively remote, hybrid, something in the middle, or completely on site. And here's where we see their study breaking down. And here's what I find fascinating. If we look at Gen Z, who I just pointed out, there's more Gen Z in the workplace than there are baby boomers now. They're the least likely to say they want to be on site all the time. However, they're also the least likely to say they want to be remote all the time. And that should begin to challenge our stereotypes. One of the reasons, actually, one of the driving reasons we came back to office, excuse me, we're always working, back to office, is it was one of our younger professionals who really had a desire for connection and they were missing that. And you brought up the point, there were people that you hired who started their careers at RSM during the pandemic, and they don't know life, what it was like when everyone was working in the office. And so they missed out on that connection. They missed out on the mentorship opportunities that came from that. And so that's a key missing element that we want to address today. How do you grow people if there is going to be more flexibility in the process? One other thing that they pointed out here in terms of which generation is extremely likely to look for another job if remote work is no longer offered? For those organizations that said Monday through Friday, we're back in the office. I'd love to poll. Actually, I will poll the audience. For those of you who are using the chat feature there, I'd love you to put your guesses into the chat. Who do you think, which generation is most likely to look for another position if there's no remote work option in there? So I got one guest that I'm seeing in here and several others coming in. Yeah, it is. I was a little curious to see where this was going to go. But the number one group that is probably going to jump ship are the millennials. And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you a geriatric millennial? Aren't you?
I am. I consider myself an exennial because
Exennial.
I could I'm a cusper, Phil.
Right on, right
I
on.
I could kind of relate, but yeah,
You
I
speak the
can,
language, you know the
yeah,
lingo.
yeah, exactly. So yeah,
So,
I feel like millennials sort of have taken on the mantra of the boomers in their size and scale right now. So they have such, like you said, a minute. By the way, I love the data and the stats on this topic because I think so often we get into those stereotypes. So this really helps us get anchored on
yeah,
what's our truths are. But yeah, I feel like the boomer generation is now looking at the millennials much different than they did, right? Like when the millennials joined the workforce years ago. So
definitely, most definitely. And I think there's that forward and reverse mentorship because I've heard many boomers
yes,
where there was initial shock. Now there's they make a lot of good points in the way that they're leading and approaching life. So I'm curious, just from this, based on this, what's your reaction? Because this is the first time I've shown you these stats. So
yeah, we didn't
in
have a
your
chance.
position of leadership, what do you think about this?
I think it's not totally surprising with respect to what Gen Z is looking for,
Hmm.
based on what we're seeing in terms of our employee makeup and experience. Again, just for the benefit of the participants, again, RSM, we're a professional services firm. We do a lot of recruiting at the entry level. So, annually we bring in thousands of, really sort of, undergraduates to join us. So our total population right now looks very similar to like what Phil, you showcased.
Okay.
Heavy millennial, Gen Z, though, is sort of ramping up. And so, what we've seen is, again, through COVID, a lot of our, sort of the older Gen Z group, all they really knew was the experiences they had in college or now work that were virtual. But as we're seeing interns this summer, here surveying, we see a lot of them hungry. They're in the office. They're looking for relationship time with people. They want to build networks and they want to do it in person. So it's a little bit of a, again, they're pushing on the value prop on like, okay, what does this look like? And what do I need to be successful? Am I going to get it here at RSM or your organization? So I do think that trend is going to continue to grow with the Gen Z cohort. And then I know in your video, you noted, wow, millennials like that, they're like 40, like early 40s. They're having like they're having children. They're at a different point of life.
Yeah.
And so I think they're now trying to struggle with like, wow, I got all this flexibility. How do I balance like what's most important for me with life?
Yeah.
And for some, it's not just work, right? It's work and, other priorities that are important to them.
Yeah, yeah. And just going back, I want to get back to millennials in a moment here, but going back to what you said about Gen Z, it's really key. And this next year, the oldest Gen Z are turning 30. So we've got to redefine like this idea that yes, they are interns, and yet they're also 5 and 6 years of work experience underneath their belt.
Right.
And for so many who started their careers, in fact, I've been doing presentations recently, and I've been asking this question when I have Gen Z folks in the room: how many of you were the graduating high school class of 2020, right? They were the ones who felt the most disruption at that pivotal time in their lives. And I'm seeing more and more in these audiences. Now they've gone through college, they've graduated, they're out in the workforce, and they're looking for exactly what you said: connection and mentorship and growth. And that's one of our key topics today. How do you do that? Because at the same time, they're also saying, but we don't want to give up all signs of flexibility. They're also the least likely to say, but don't make me come in all the time, but I want to be in. And when I'm in, I want that time to be valuable. I want someone there helping me succeed. So I'm going to pull up my next, because I want to move into now, how do we begin to manage that? So my next uh, topic, or the first one we're really going to dive into here, is flexibility and productivity, right? So how do we balance this world where we do, and many organizations are, because we learned we can use these tools to be, we can provide a little bit more flexibility. Not all. Some organizations are saying Monday through Friday. But how do you balance this world where, okay, we're going to provide some flexibility, but is it compromising other, work getting done and so forth? Because there are these different perspectives. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about what you're doing at RSM to make sure that, you're crossing all the T's, dotting the I's. What are you seeing in terms of coming, return to office, and how's it affecting through collaboration and so forth? Let's just kind of dive into this a little bit more, and then we can maybe get into Gen Z, millennial managing expectations and so forth.
Sure. Yeah, no, these questions are awesome. By the way, again, everybody, I'm here to learn. And so this conversation is absolutely, rich for me just as much as me sharing sort of perspective. So again, I think, we don't spend enough concentrated time talking about these topics. And I mean, that maybe as it relates to just the community perspective on this, but at RSM, we are, like I mentioned earlier, we're a professional services firm. So our business in essence is relationships. And we have, that relationships happening within the organization as we collaborate on teams, virtual, hybrid, global, but then serving clients and working with them in terms of collaborating with them at their, place of work, their office. And so, if you think about it, because of that being sort of the primary driver of our business, this idea of productivity and collaboration becomes really essential to figuring out how do we maximize this in all the complexity that we were just talking about related to today's workforce. So we have kind of continued, and again, maybe for those of you who aren't familiar with us, it's important to note, we were always very forward thinking with this idea of flexibility at work. I mean, since I joined RSM about 21 years ago, we were always very much of the mindset that with flexibility comes more engagement, more commitment, more loyalty, and then that translates to higher productivity and drives results for our business. So we continue to promote the importance of creating flexibility. And we talk a lot about informal versus formal. And a lot of us, really try to push as it relates to management and leadership. Hey, and again, kind of Phil, what you talked about, sort of coming out of this COVID, there's a lot of flexibility that you have to benefit from as long as you elevate collaboration and communication and think about how you define what you need in order to sort of perform at the highest, best, level of ability. That said, we do have formal programming that, we could offer our people, whether that's fully virtual or this hybrid relationship that's much more defined by, management and human resources and the professional themselves. So we offer sort of like a mix to kind of meet people where they're at. And I guess maybe one of my hopefully sound bites from today is the importance of just that. We have to make it easy for our people and meet them where they're at in order to get the most from them as it relates to their participation in our businesses today. If we ignore that or pretend that that's not important, I think we lose the value proposition that, creates a healthy commitment to, your organization. So I think right now we're trying to figure out, okay, we have all that back to office. Like, again, like that's a very okay, what's the new value proposition for office? And I think, Phil, like you said earlier, a lot of this is trying to figure out when people are together in person, what are we doing intentionally to create connectivity that really elevates people's sense of community? And, again, we can talk more about what that means, but, I do think I'm pushing on our business very, very hard to think about, what do you want your culture to look like? And the thing about culture is, we get what we put into it, right? Like it's one of those things you can be really intentional about creating the culture you want and sustaining that, or you can put it on autopilot and think that, it doesn't, matter. But the companies that are doing that are going to find themselves behind in a big way, I think. So.
Yeah, I mean, so many nuggets in there in what you said as it relates to intentionality. And what really resonated with me was when you talked about, again, pro tips, everybody. It's being, how do you create a value proposition? It's not just the idea of return to office, because that's a location. It's
Right.
what happens when we return to office? What connection are we fostering? And then how does that impact the productivity of the team, of the individual, of the organization, right? This isn't just okay, we need to move back here for what? What's
Yes.
the reason? And so when you said, let's be intentional, what happens when we come back to office? One of the questions that someone brought up here is, how do you create buy-in from all employees on purpose if they have strong feelings about being productive from home? And I think you just answered that question when you said there's got to be a reason for this coming together, this connection that happens. And I
Yes.
love that sentiment. Someone posed the question, is collaboration better in person? And we talked a little bit about this. I mean, we're having this discussion virtually, right? I mean, you're
Right.
in Baltimore.
I am. Yes.
I'm in, well, technically St. Paul. And so we're being productive, right? We're getting things done. At least I've seen a few hearts and a few applauses go up in this virtual smoke screen here. And yet I also believe if we were together, there'd even be that additional synergy energy that can happen, plus the post there'd be time for pre-conversation, conversation, and ongoing, creativity that we could develop. So it's a yes and. Again, the
Yes.
binary
Yes.
world of the past is going away. It's not, well, it's either this or that, but it's both. And how do we
Both.
make the most of both? So
It's
love it.
both. Yeah, I remember coming out of COVID early on, we tried to encourage people to return to the office here, and people were coming back and, finding themselves working like, stacked days of meetings and, conversations, but all done sort of through virtual means. So they were coming in the office and plugging in, but not interacting with anybody in the office. It's like, well, what
Yeah.
are we doing here? Like
Yes.
we're coming here because we think it's important, but nobody's interacting. So we caught ourselves there and had to say, all right, take a hard look at this. Is this really what we think our culture is defined by?
Mm.
Um, and so I think we had to look in the mirror and make some adjustments and changes. And I think this comment, even in the chat here with Greg, we've really had to work on the fact that, like you said, everybody in this firm, no matter what level you are, has a responsibility to be participating and creating culture. And we had to be really clear about that. Like we found we were messaging, unfortunately, a lot to our leaders, like, hey, you all need to get more involved and engaged. But really, it's everybody needs to hear that message.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And it definitely starts with leaders. Most certainly, they set the tone. And I think that's been one of the challenges is, as we talked about earlier, you'll have, new professionals wanting to come in and connect with people. And folks like myself are like, I got all the connections I need, pretty much what I do. I can just get this done. So the leaders do need to set the tone for creating that culture. But then also, those others, like the one comment, people that are forced to come in and they walk around, they won't even look you in the eye because they're mad that they have to be there. Well, at any level, if that's your mindset, that's your perspective, you're wounding that culture, just death by a thousand paper cuts. Eventually people don't want to show up. So if we all come in with the right mindset, it will change the game, most certainly. Um, I do want to point out, I'm going to share another stat here. If we can pull up my slide deck. I met this gentleman at a presentation I did. His name is Joe Mull. He wrote a book called Employalty. And in it, he talks about what happens when leaders trust their people. And Dan, you said something earlier that made me, I want to share this stat here. You said, we have to create an environment where we believe in our people. So you said, okay, how do I create the best environment to get the best out of them? And I think offering some of that flexibility fuels that trust. And here was the research that Joe did talking about what happens when, I'm going to give you this, opportunity to create the environment where you can be most productive. And there's awesome responses that people have when leaders do trust their people. So with that, let's talk about culture.
Yeah.
This is your sweet spot, man. This is why I brought you to the game because this is, everything we've talked about in the past and the work that we've done has really been about this. And so I think there is some challenge, like I just talked about, when depending on how you show up, when you show up, are you just, in the office, head down, getting your work done? Are you working in an office and your team is in another office in another country, another part of the
Yeah.
country, maybe even another country, which we've got client partners that have, that type of setting, right? So in this new flexible world, what are some things that we can do to still make sure people are getting mentored, building those connections? And I'd love to hear practical examples of what you've done with that intentionality at RSM to kind of bring this to life.
Yeah, I mean, this is again such a rich discussion on what is culture, how do we maintain it, how do we sustain it? Is it what we want? I think, for everybody here, this is again my take on it, but I mean, it has to be rooted in your firm's strategy, values, and behavior. Like I think if you haven't taken the if you're in a position of influence in your organization that whether it doesn't matter what leadership level you are, I think you owe it to your organization to go back and say, hey, how is our culture resonating in the form of our strategy, values, right, behaviors, first and foremost. If you can anchor your work in that, it becomes very clear as to what your culture stands for and what your culture is all about. Then the work here, right, relates to maintaining it and showing it. And again, Phil and I've, we spent a lot of time talking about like what does culture look like? I define culture as really simply the way we interact with each other, how we engage with each other. And there's, objective and subjective culture, right? There's things you can point to that say, hey, we believe in this, and here's how we do it by the activities, the programs, the events that we run. But the subjectivity stuff is the behaviors and, what it's a little maybe harder to see. So I look at culture as a game of sort of how are we playing on both playing fields? Like the behavior stuff has to be a part of this. And then, does the activities and the programs that we run provide right space for us to work on behaviors, practice those behaviors, strengthen them, and sort of working those two things in conduit creates great culture. But again, if culture simply is the way we interact, no matter whether you're a boomer or a Gen Z professional, how are you interacting with each other every day? I mean, I watched that show, The Bear. I don't know how many people watch The Bear. I feel, have you watched that? It's like,
I have not.
it's
But
about this like Chicago restaurant trying to make it, right? And there's a whole phrase around the show that says every second counts. And so I sort of indoctrinated that on our team as it relates to culture. Every second, what are you doing to help create, foster, sustain a high inclusive, high performing culture? Because that's what we're doing here.
wow.
Right?
I love that. First, I'm curious. So yeah, someone put in here, yes, chef. So someone watches The Bear.
Yes,
If you watch The Bear, go ahead and drop your bear love in there. I'll have to check it
please.
out.
You gotta
I'm
watch it.
way
You would love
behind.
it.
I'm still catching up on like Cheers. I'm like way behind,
Lord. Yes.
but
Yes.
I love this idea of every second counts, and I keep like, one of my mantras is always if you live if you live thinking about yesterday, you're depressed. If you live thinking about the future, you have anxiety. So I'm always like, you be present today. But
Be present.
every second, that's like next level intentionality. But I could not agree with you more in terms of behavior and activity. And again, it's not one or the other, it's both, right? You've got to have programming. And one of the, I think we invited one of your leaders at RSM, Richard Catarano, to speak about your work in ERGs, right? So there's
Yes.
programming, and your organization are like incredible leaders in that space. How do we create activities for people to connect? But where it comes down to you and I and how we, really foster a culture, it is how our behavior, how we treat one another. And I think that does happen in proximity with each other, at a higher level. Um,
Yep.
Curious
Yep.
though, like what are some things, because when it comes to generations, and
Right.
different work styles, work ethics, some, I mean, I had a baby boomer once tell me, I'm here to make friends. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make money. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one mindset of going to work. And then there's this other, like, yeah, but this, you will spend, assuming a typical career, you might spend more waking hours with your coworkers than you do with, some members of your own family. And
Right.
so like how do you foster that? How do we teach that yeah, our behavior matters? What are some things that you've done as a leader or maybe to help with your teams to get that? Because not everyone gets it.
Yeah, it's so true, right? It's easy to say. It's a lot harder to practice. I think, a lot of what we're trying to do here at our firm is figure out how to be more, really intentional about driving right behaviors during the day-to-day experiences and working moments that our people have. And actually, we're benefited with the opportunity to collaborate a lot with a group called Leader Factor and Dr. Tim Clark. I'm not sure how many of
Oh
the
yeah.
listeners are familiar with Dr. Tim Clark's research
Yeah.
on psychological safety.
Yes. I
But
love
we,
I quote him all the time.
all right, cool. All right,
Okay.
all right.
Have you met him? Have you worked with him
Yes,
directly? Okay.
yes, yes, yes.
Well,
Yeah, he's,
we need to talk more about that then. Yes,
yeah,
love.
yeah. So what we've been trying to do is, take sort of his framework and his team's framework, and then really kind of go into like intact teams and start measuring psych safety at the team level. Because again, culture is a team game. It's not, a one person's responsibility. So we look at, how, psych safety is being practiced by a team through the lens of inclusion, learning, contributor, and this idea of challenger, which is really like, are you innovating? Are people on your team feeling comfortable to challenge the
Yeah.
status quo of the way we do things around here? Which, by the way, is a tie back to Gen IQ training, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what the power of
Yes.
generations is all about. Like we bring those perspectives, and that goes to your point about collaboration, right? Like collaboration to me is all about, can I share my perspective, even if it's different than
Yeah.
the way things get done around here.
Yeah.
And the teams that are like, yeah, please share, are going
Uh-huh.
to elevate their performance, right? Versus, oh, I'm only here, like you said, like that, like I'm only here to make money. Well, that seems very like, it's a different viewpoint. And, what I would promote as like the way we want to show up and lead. Of course, we all want to win
Right.
and make money, but we can do that through collaborating with each other and
Yeah.
driving a higher level of purpose. So, but yeah, we're doing a lot of work on really getting under the hood of teams and trying to figure out, what are they doing to create this environment, culture, if you will. And a lot of what we teach in that is around the behaviors that you need to be operating with to elevate people through the lens of being included, feeling a sense of belonging, giving people space to learn, make mistakes, really like fail
Yeah.
and say,
Yeah.
hey, what did you learn from this versus, wow, you're in trouble now and you've created a lot of stress for our team, right? That's a different mindset, different behavior. Contributor around how am I, value creating for my team, for my business, for my office. And then, how am I challenging some of the things that we could maybe do better? Have we thought about it differently? And so we've actually been doing this now for the last, I'd say, 18 months, and it's opened up a lot of rich conversations and discussions within the team. And I think, again, it's just all about, in my opinion, being intentional about spending some time on this. And, I think this goes for hybrid global as much as, sort of in office, in-person teams. Like you can apply this framework for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, again, for all of our participants, and I appreciate folks are responding in the chat here. We're going to get to Q&A in just a moment, but this is an example of, I think, an amazing pro tip. And when you said Dr. Tim Clark, I thought, oh, you must know him because I always call him Dr. Timothy Clark. So I'm not on a three-letter name basis with the guy. I've only read his stuff. But so again, example of RSM, Dan's leadership. Let's not just talk about it. Let's find systems. Let's find tools. Let's find
Yes.
strategies. And that, from, the inclusion, the learner, the contributor, the challenger, safety, it's an amazing framework. And I think it's Dr. Clark who says, the indicator of belonging is whether or not vulnerability is punished or rewarded. Isn't that in some of his work as well?
Yeah, that is the essence, the
Yeah.
central tip
And
of the
so,
discussion.
so if you think about everything we've talked about here, right? Whether, let's just say, I mean, any one of the points of view with regard to return to work. We should be in 5 days a week. I have a hard stance, or we should be hybrid, or we should be remote, or I want a little flexibility to take my kids to school, or anything challenging status quo. To behave in a way that creates a culture of belonging is to pause and go, you know what? I'm not going to punish that person for
Exactly.
sharing their opinion. In fact, I really invite, I'm so glad you brought that up. Let's have a conversation about this because
Yes.
that's how you get to a place where, hey, we can all work, we can figure out a way to work together through this.
I mean, it's funny, like you're absolutely right. Like again, the other thing is like reward it, like celebrate
Reward.
it,
Uh-huh.
recognize it, and
Yeah.
say, hey, that's a great idea. I mean, we have I'm always excited this time of the year. We do at our firm, caretaker, mother, father of the year
Oh,
recognition
okay.
for the whole firm. And it's just a nod to like, people who are working, right, and taking care of people in their life that are important, but that like we reward it. Like,
Love
like you
that.
celebrate that, and all of a sudden the culture starts to shift. It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
wow, RSM really cares about this. Again, it's an example of a program that drives, right, like acknowledgement of what we want the culture to be like.
Hmm.
But I mean, I think it's recognition is a program, if used wisely, can really transform your business,
I love that. I love
right?
that. Yeah, for sure. So I have a 28-year-old daughter and I still pay her cell phone bill. So am I a caretaker? Am I into
You're
the
you're recognizing. You're,
That's all I'm wondering. Hey, the last section, and I want to make sure we have some time for some Q&A here, is
yeah,
leading with inclusion. And again, in your title, you are the senior director, and I love it, culture of inclusion leader, right? That's just it's just different enough to make you stop and think about the work that you do. And this is a question I've seen a lot, and it's related to how do you create fairness between
mm,
hybrid and remote staff? There's a lot of tension, in this around this conversation because expectations have changed now that this is an opportunity. And you can see the different questions here, but we have just enough time. I'm just curious, any advice or thoughts when you get in your organization? I imagine there's lots of different approaches. Some might be in more than the others, and vice versa. Any thoughts around this space of,
yeah. It's a great point. I think, right, like when I read these points here and reflect a little bit, I think one, it's important as a business that and I should have said this earlier, right? Like I do think the business does create an environment where it's a relationship. And in any relationship, you acknowledge that sometimes, when it comes to flexibility, we ask for stuff and the individual asks for stuff. And the best businesses, right, can really relate and meet their people where they're at as it relates to creating, flexibility. So there are times at our firm where we're like, hey, as a perfect example, hey, we summer interns are starting. We need you to come to the office and spend some time with them. Like that's the business asking, right? Like for our people to come in and spend some time. Like I
right.
think business it's a value proposition where both sides have to be willing to flex and
Mhm.
meet each other where they're at. I do think it's important to really work on determining does your function or department need to be in the office given certain days of the week or all week. Like what's the business objective that you're serving on as it relates to your job and your role and your function. And like that's maybe the first place to start. From there, I think it's a matter of how do we create that flexibility for people when they need it, right? So I get a little uncomfortable when I see, oh, one department's doing this and another department's not. I think it's appropriate to have a dialogue with leadership and HR and those who help sort of set the equity standards on, the ways we work, to engage in that type of dialogue and understand. But it's also up to the business, I think, to be very clear and transparent about like why one group is doing something and another group is doing something different. Otherwise, you get, I think, a lot of that internal back channel of confusion and frustration, and that leads to stress and disengagement or even quiet quitting, which goes against sort of the value proposition we have in business today. So I think, really important for businesses to take ownership and communicate clearly what their policy is, be really clear about engaging with management on how do we set that policy in your teams. And if you are somebody who is experiencing sort of that inequity, I think it's really appropriate to have a conversation with management and HR and engage in a curious, sort of inquisitive learning mode. Because again, at the end of the day, I think what you're going to try to do is get people to think a little bit differently on the reality that, hey, we have a whole business to run here, and we have to be transparent with and communicate with our people on how this is working. Otherwise, like I said, it creates a lot of ambiguity and stress. So this is clearly, though, like an equity strategy, which, we're not gonna have a lot of time to talk about, Phil, but like you talk about like sort of modern day, like new school diversity, equity, inclusion. This is a great topic for you because we want to integrate, right? Like equity into the business. This is happening right now.
Such a key starting point, and I think very relevant and relatable, And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? This is where organization leaders, policies need to be really clear. You don't have, if it's so willy-nilly or it's, any scent of favoritism is going to pretty much undermine all the goodwill you've tried to build so far.
That's right.
The culture and so forth.
I would just say don't go at this alone, though. I mean, I think I've mentioned like engage human resources, engage even your DEI, if there is a DEI inclusion team. I mean, what a lot of my work on is centered on like engaging leadership to make sure that the policies and the processes are reflective in their business, strategy. So if you're feeling like, this isn't working for me, or I'm not getting something that somebody else is, don't make this your sort of personal vendetta to try to go against management with, because you might find yourself on the wrong end of the plate, the table in that sense. But I engage others. Is what I would suggest.
Love it. All right, we're just under 10 minutes left of our scheduled time, and I want to open it up. Anyone, if you have any questions, I think we have a question that was submitted in the chat. We have our both the chat feature and the Q&A tool open. Love to hear any questions that are on your mind that Dan and I might not have a chance to address or cover. Again, there were so many great questions that came in, and I just synthesize them under categories. But, this is an interesting point as we're waiting for some questions. Maybe there's a question over here. Okay, wait. How do we have time to customize every single employee's experience at work as a leader? So if you're a leader of a large organization, or even you're managing a pretty significant team, how can a leader or an organization, for that matter, responsibly address all the needs of the individuals on their team? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, it feels like it's a lot to ask leaders to be, right, like thinking about every single person's needs at every single moment of the day. That said, though, leadership, is about inspiring and motivating people. And I think understanding how they're wired is really important to being successful in that role. Again, your job as a leader, in my opinion, is to sort of see value creation through others. So understanding how they're looking for flexibility in this case is really important. I know I mentioned at the beginning of the call, like RSM here has informal and formal strategies as it relates to flexibility. When you go formal, it's required, like, you're making a commitment in writing with HR, your leadership, and
Right.
in a lot of cases, it may mean you're reducing your work time, but you're also reducing your pay. And I've always said, that's an important decision to make, right? And so if you're really looking for, hey, my kids need to be dropped off or picked up, and I can't make this call because of this, I mean, that's flexibility we should work on. I mean, Phil, you brought up earlier like this global strategy. I mean, we are a global workforce too. We have business in India, El Salvador, Canada. I mean,
Yeah.
different time zones. I mean, the leader, the team has to flex
Yeah.
to meet the team where they're at. I mean, that's just the way that the team is going to be successful. So, I mean, I think engaging in the discussion with your people on what makes them their best possible performer, and is flexibility an element of that? Listen, I mean, our firm, we have like, I don't know, Phil, if you have any exposure, bevy water machines where you pick the flavor. I mean, people are picking their flavor of water today.
Right. Yeah.
We have to customize our work.
I got you. I
It
got you.
is
Yeah.
the thing, like, that people want, like, their flexibility. Like, you're
Right.
not going to put that back in the bottle, man.
I think one of the questions that came up in here was around where do these different expectations come from? Well, they come from life experiences.
Yeah.
Every other part of my life, I have the ability to pick and choose. Even like something as simple as television. I mean, as a Zennial, you grew up with three networks like I did, and you didn't choose when your show was going to be on. It was on Thursday night at 7 o'clock. I mean, that was and that was whatever. And now so many options and customization choices and so forth. I want to address one more question here before we run out of time. It's kind of a statement, but I think we can speak to it. Person writes in here: the flexible hybrid working is different at different offices and can create discourse instead of building networks. And something, again, it's more of an observation, and we've kind of addressed this inequity, and so people feel different ways. I think, though, in your last response, you said something that triggered a thought in tandem with this statement. I had a mentor years ago. I learned, I don't know him, but I listened to a lot of his stuff, and he would always say, a person doesn't get paid for time. They don't get paid to work really hard. They don't get paid to be really, really smart. We get paid for the value that we offer to an organization. Now, it takes time, it takes hard work, and it, takes intelligence to create value. But, one person might be able to create just as much value in, two-thirds of the time as someone else, maybe because they have more experience on their side. And then you bring in this whole idea of AI.
Oh, yeah.
When I would prepare for conversations like this in the past, I would take all the questions, I would read through them, I would sort them in buckets. I took all the questions, threw them in AI, and I said, organize these in 4 or 5 categories for me. And zero point 0.7 seconds later, it was done. And I was like, okay, here's our topic. This is what Dan and I are going to cover. And so what would have taken me an hour and a half, it took me just a short amount of time. Now, we still do the work. We still have the conversation. These are still your questions that have come up, but these tools can expedite the type of work we used to do. So that's another big part of this conversation. One person asked
Yes.
early, one of the questions was, well, with talking about a 6-hour workday versus an 8, but you said earlier, it's an important conversation, but maybe it affects your pay. However, if you can be as or more valuable with new tools, does it have to? And that's kind of where we're at now. It also tees up my next community conversation, which is going to be about AI.
Oh,
And I
great
think
one.
you and I need to have another conversation about DEI and
Yes. Yes.
everything else that's coming down the pike. With the last bit of time that we have here, I'll give you the final words, sir. Any
I
bits
mean,
of advice?
yeah, just a point about that. Remember, AI can cut out some of that heavy lift. Phil just gave a great example that so that you can spend more time connecting with your,
Yes.
teammates around who they are, their
Yes.
story. What's my
100.
story? Sharing that
Yeah.
instead of, working on the work that the AI can produce for us. So
Right.
shift your focus is maybe my big takeaway. My other one is just you're not alone. You have excellent partners. BridgeWorks is that for us. So tap into your network to solve these problems. Do not try to take this on by yourself. It's a lot more fun when you have thought partners like BridgeWorks who can help you bring really kind of crystallize your thoughts into actual strategy and action. So, Phil, thanks for the time here today. I loved it. Can't wait to go again another round with you.
Thank you, my brother. I'm going to pull up just one more slide here that just addresses. We're going to have another conversation coming up in September. Dan, you are truly amazing. You make my heart feel good. You have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy life in Baltimore, and I hope to see you in person real soon, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bridge, for all of you attendees, I'm going to leave a slide up here. If you're interested in connecting with BridgeWorks as a partnership, you can reach us at generations.com. My business partner, Krista Thielen, is always on the ready as our client experience officer. Wanted to create a great experience, a great connection with you, or connecting you to other professionals, experts who can help solve some of your challenges. So with that, we are out of time, and I wish you all the very best. Enjoy the rest of your days, and we'll see you real soon.